And thank you for organizing all that. And by the way, if you've forgotten everything, I'm also talking tomorrow at the Java user group here in New York, so you can come back and listen to it again if you like. No, but probably not. So we have one last slot with 20 minutes, right? Live coding Zeebe, and I'm actually really happy to be able to do some coding today, because that's actually what I love to do. And but anyhow, I start with the slides again. Sorry, because I briefly want to. Oh, what's happening? Oh yeah, we're getting back. Yes, I have basically one slide explaining everything of Zeebe. So that's actually a good start to do that. So we already talked about the motivation. So the motivation is basically building a workflow engine for really large-scale applications, huge volumes. So whenever the relational database cannot handle it anymore. And how do we do that? How is it different from what we have today? So the first you probably notice is that from the language we're saying broker instead of engine. That's kind of what you normally use as a terminology in distributed systems, so broker as a way to be. And the difference is already here. So what you can see is we wrote Zeebe in Java as well, so that's not a difference. But we clearly separate the processes. So they're like the operating system processes. So whenever with Camunda BPM, you could start it with Spring Boot, for example, in flight, in process. So we don't do that anymore with the Zeebe. So Zeebe is always like a separate broker. And then you start your application and you have a client against it. It's like a JDBC client in the database. You connect remotely, but we speak a binary protocol, and it's very efficient. It's very fast. It's for isolation that's beneficial. So we see a lot of issues in support, for example, resulting from mixing the two and not being isolated, which makes it sometimes harder to see where the fault comes from, and that makes it clearly separated. And then you have still your Bpmn file, so Zeebe still uses Bpmn. You define the Bpmn file still typically within your application, but then you deploy it on the broker keeps the and executes it. And if you have service tasks, and if you wonder how I execute code, I show that live in a second, then this is done by your application again. And so you write a bit of code here, and that pops up basically to the broker and says, okay, and can do this service task whenever there is something to do. Tell me, I do it, and then it's done. And there, it's really pops up, so we publish and subscribe, and this can even be stream into the client. So this is again very efficient. So from all that, it doesn't mean it's lower than what you have today. It's even faster, even if it's like two processes. Can we postpone the question for a second? Because I'm running, I think, really short in time. If it's very important to understand this whole picture, we can do it. Otherwise, we have a whole question slot. So that's a bit different to what we have today. Coding-wise, coding-wise, we don't look at coded slides, right? That's what we don't do. We look at code in Eclipse, which normally poses the question, why is this guy still using Eclipse? Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a bit lazy. I should switch it, but I still use Eclipse for the moment. Basically, I just grew up with Eclipse, so I stick with it. But I should do something else. So New York. We do something from scratch. And I have to apologize, actually. I have to apologize because I'm still officially on paternity leave, so I'm not working at the moment, as you can see. And I just flew to New York, and this, basically when Paul gives his talk, I recognized I have to do the Zeebe talk, the live coding. I said, that's no problem, I do it, but I'm stuck with an old version. So I don't have the latest version, and the API changed a bit. So if you program like in sync on your computer, you probably have to adapt a bit. But the basic idea is still the same. So let's get going with a public static void main. So I can do a Zeebe client. Where's the problem? Zeebe client? No. create. That's what I want to do. So I do that thing. You could do it with Spring Boot. You can do it whatever you want. You could provide a URL to connect to. Default is localhost, so I have a broker on localhost. Where do I have the broker? Just to quickly show you that, I restart it. So the broker, when you download it, oh no, that was another demo. The broker, when you download it, it's a zip file, it's a tar file, it's a Docker file, a Docker image, depending on what you want to do. And if you go in there, you can just start the broker, depending on the operating system. So I just use the batch file. There's the broker. It just started up. There, by the way, is the data directory. That's where we store the data. So there's no separate database. We just do it on the file system, but then we replicate that. I come back to that in a second. So there's the broker. I can connect to that with that Zeebe client. That's all I need. Oh, no, I have to remember the client. So, and the next thing I can do is I can say I want to deploy a workflow. So you're probably familiar with the Camunda BPM, so that should not be so surprising. So I can say deploy, and as I say, these small tiny things have changed, so it's a bit more annoying than in the latest version. So I want to deploy something to the default topic. I come back to the topic in a second, just ignore that for a moment. And then I can add a resource from class path, the most complicated. We call it New York. And what I always forget, I give this demo so often, I always forget if I need a slash or not. Somebody knows? Java guys? Yes? No? Ah, yeah. So who can program Java here in the room? Can. Who thinks I need a slash? Who thinks I don't need a slash? Okay, more without the slash. We try that one. That's amazing. These basic things are really amazing. But I never. But on the other hand, we can try it. We don't have to remember. There's a modeler. It's very comparable to the Camunda modeler. It's a Zeebe modeler. You can also download that online. The only difference is we stripped it down to the Bpmn element Zeebe supports. So it's, you see it's much less on the palette. But it's still Bpmn. And it has different properties. So we can do something like say hello. We obviously have to do a hello world. With the typo's okay. So we say topic name, come back to that in a second. And I can, New York City, make it executable, same thing as in Bpm, as Camunda BPM, save it as Bpmn file. So there we go, we have an executable process which doesn't do much, but that's okay for the moment. This should be here, right? Yes, there it is. So I can deploy that, execute it. So then I have something running. I make a sysout deployed. What we also have is, I started that somewhere here. As a Spring Boot application there, we have a small monitor. It's called Zeebe Simple Monitor. It's not really like Cockpit, so don't expect the same maturity as Cockpit. Actually, the simple monitor, I remember that I went to the first proof of concept we did with Zeebe, and at that point in time, we didn't have any UI, and I said, this is awful. I mean, we have Bpmn, we have visibility. We cannot go there without a UI, and so I basically hacked that in the plane. And afterwards, we did a bit of stuff to make it work, but it's not like a production usage thing, so it's meant to be just to have something. So I can connect to the broker. Then I can see workflow definitions which are deployed. So we don't see our New York City process, so let's change that. I just run that. Amazing technology. It connects to the broker. It should deploy it. It deploys it, and it's there. Woohoo! That was already pretty cool. Yeah, thank you. I'm excited as well. And then we can start stuff. And it gets a bit more interesting in a second. So I want to create a new workflow instance. Then I have to define the process ID. What was that? I think New York City. So that's the basically comparable. I could add variables. So with a payload, but we don't do that for the moment. Just to save time, I run out of time, I think. And I say started because I want actually to show you more interesting stuff. So I can, hey, where you are? There we are. Yeah, we have a started instance. So what I can see is I can look into workflow instances and I see, oh, there was a workflow instance. It's now waiting in say hello. That's kind of making sense. So how do I do that? So the next thing is I can create a worker. Yeah, with the typo, typos are good. So worker. So what I do is I create a task and I can have a new task subscription. So I subscribe to be able to do a certain task, and then I provide a couple of things like I'm the worker number 1 or whatever. So just to identify myself, I lock it for let's say 1 minute. Explain that in a second. I'm providing a handler. And I can open it, I think. Probably I forgot something that we get an exception in a second. And then I can do my sysout. And that's basically the Java delegate you know from Camunda BPM. And then I probably, it's amazing how much you forget when you're away from keyboard for a couple of weeks. And somebody else in the room should know that. I have to do something about that. Oh, no. Oh, damn it. Sorry. Client complete task. As I said, we improved the API. So in the newer version, that's much easier to do. And then let's do that. So I started. Oh, yay. Task type. Yeah, we forgot the task type. Task type. The task type, the most important thing actually, that's a connection to the Bpmn now. So we don't have a Java delegate class referenced here, but we have kind of a topic name, like a message queue name. So this is say hello, and now we can subscribe to that and say whenever there's something for say hello, let's do that. And that opens a subscription, and again, let's try it, if I did it correctly. Yes, this is Hello New York City, and if I now start new instances, the worker is running, it basically get that streamed directly in the background. So we see the next one. And if I go back to the monitor, I also see that reflected. So I have the first one. I thought I have completed it. Probably, yeah, my default error. As I said, we improved the API in the meanwhile because that happened to everybody. So I don't want to explain it too much. Can do the worker again. And if I start stuff, it starts. It says, hello, New York. And now if I look here, it's even like finished. So this is a bit of Zeebe. What's now completely new is that the way we store the data. So there's no relational database underneath. Instead, we're using, and let me quickly show you that on the slide. I can do the same stuff with Spring Boot, then it gets a bit easier. So from here, what we do is the first thing, which is also important to recognize. So with that architecture, you can also use clients in different languages very easily. So we have already Go, we have a C# client, we're having a Node client, and I think even some others currently going on in the community. So you can have different technologies because it's a remote connection, so you can do all of that. We're doing, that's what I meant, binary protocol. It's very efficient, so it's not a slow thing. We can do streaming into the client, and we're batching. So if you have like really like millions of tasks going on, we're not sending each and every one over the wire, but we're sending big batches of doing that. But that's not the important part. The more important part, and that's what I wanted to say here, what we do as persistence, we're doing an append-only lock, event sourcing. So we are writing events to the disk. And this is what you can see also in the monitor. And you can also get that via API. What happens in the background is that whenever you start a workflow instance, where is that? Workflow instance started. created. Whenever you start a workflow instance, we store a command that a new workflow instance should be created. Then we do it internally, and then we create an event workflow instance created. And that means, oh, there's a start event occurred. Then a sequence flow is taken. Then the activity is ready, and the activity is activated. And we store this event log on disk. And from this event log, we can always recreate the current state of the workflow engine. Why do we do that? If you're familiar with event sourcing, there are quite a couple of advantages. One is that we never have to do updates. In a database, we update the state, but we don't have to do that. We just add events, which is much easier to do and scales much better. And then this append only log, if you have multiple brokers, you can configure the amount of brokers you want to send it to as a replica, and then we replicate it to, for example, 2 other nodes to be safe in case one of the broker breaks down, and then the other one takes over. There we do stuff like raft and leader election and all these kind of things you do in distributed systems, which makes it possible to scale really horizontally. Yeah, I think that's kind of the essence what Zeebe is doing there. And we discussed in the break, by the way, we're having Bpmn there, but we're currently also defining a YAML input file. If you have simple processes, you can also define that as a YAML, which is sometimes important if people don't like XML, which for developers very often is the case. So we sometimes have that, oh, you're using Bpmn as an XML file. Oh no, that's horrible. That's like 10 years in the past. So we want to have JSON or YAML, so we can't do that. In the background, we're translating that to Bpmn, and then we can execute that. One thing I wanted to say, which I forgot, Bpmn coverage, right, and maturity. So what you saw is that we currently can do service tasks, we can do XOR gateway, so a decision, but that's the current state what we have. You can have payload, and that's it. We're currently working on a message correlation, so that it can start a new workflow by sending in a message, or you can wait for a certain message. That's the next thing we will do. We will work on timers, event-based gateway, parallel gateway, and also probably sub-processes and scopes. That's more or less what we're currently working at, and what you should expect till end of the year. But that's from the maturity point of view, what you can see. I mean, we're at the very beginning. With Camunda BPM, we're very mature. With Zeebe, we're at the very beginning. But on the other hand, you saw it on the slides earlier, we can run like millions of workflow instances per second on this kind of technology. And what you could see, at least, it's not much harder to use. So it's still very, very easy to do.
Do you intend to support user tasks in this eventually, or they're only going to be for?
So the architecture there will change a bit. So if you're looking at that, what we're doing there is that the core broker should do only workflow execution. So as soon as you have, like, for example, decision management, DMN, or also task management, human task management, you will probably have like a separate component. Like it could be like you have a task component, and that subscribes to the broker and says, okay, whenever you have something for the task topic, give it to me. I display it in a user task list, and if I complete it, I talk to you back. And this would even allow to have like multiple brokers, but one central task service. Or what we also work on is an own cockpit. We call it operate in that context, but an own operation tool, and that will also work in a manner that it subscribes to the broker, and then it can, for example, also subscribe to multiple brokers, not only to a single one. And that, so the architecture changes a bit. So core Zeebe will not handle anything about task management, but it will be easy to plug in from the outside. Yeah, I think we're from the time we're anyhow in the question time. So we can directly move on towards that one. So if you still have questions for Zeebe or for whatever, let us know. Even if you have for the colleagues or for anybody, let us know. So we are starting there.
So Zeebe is completely independent of Camunda?
Yeah. So Zeebe is an own, I mean, it depends on what you mean with completely independent from Camunda. It's an own open source product. The engineers working on that are all Camunda employees. So it's, I mean, that's not, from company-wise, not independent, but technically, it's a completely new engine. It's completely independent of Camunda.
Does it share any, like, forgive the expression, legacy code from the previous product?
No, not really.
That's good if it does.
It's actually what it shares are stuff around, for example, the modeler, obviously. But the core engine is architecturally wise completely different.
Okay. And will it have cockpit eventually?
We work on that. It's called operate in that context, but it also works differently. It works a bit more like optimize. So it will have Elasticsearch underneath and do all the query stuff, and then we're sending something back to Zeebe.
And it's about a year away, plus or minus?
So operate should be there also end of the year in some form. End of this year, we target the 1.0 with the Zeebe, and then we also want to have an operate. In what form, which features we will have at that point in time, we will see. But that's a current target.
And forgive all the questions, a year from now, how will we decide or choose between one and the other?
That will be pretty easy, I would say, for at least the next 2 or 3 years. So if you don't need anything Zeebe provides you, the performance, the scalability, I don't have any relational database or whatever, if you don't have these requirements, go with Camunda Bpmn, because that's, from maturity level, it's much easier to apply. If you have these requirements, look into Zeebe. That's the current default. And that, I think, will be true for the next years. That will be not so fast. Yes?
Just a related question. Do you expect to be able to deliver the entire Bpmn palette on Zeebe?
So the question was if we are, okay, actually the question was, I think, if we think we can deliver the whole thing on Zeebe.
You exploit about
Yeah.
persistence into a relational database to support the full palette?
Okay, so the question was if it's really technically possible, and yes, it will be technically possible. I mean, we have to really think about new solutions how to do that. For example, with the message correlation, we already get that problem that we haven't looked into the details, but because we are having that scalability, a workflow instance typically, or every workflow instance has exactly one broker where it currently lives in as the master. So if I do message correlation, I'm sending a message from the client. This message will be from the client delivered to one of the brokers, and then we have to find basically the right brokers which are interested in this message. That's all already kind of a query problem, so that needs to be solved, and we will solve these kind of problems. That's what we are do, and for the most complex stuff, we already have the vision how to do that, even if it's not yet completely coded. The second question will be if we really want to support the full Bpmn palette, and that's what I don't know yet. So what we currently do is, I mean, that's the coverage from Camunda Bpmn 7.9, which is really, really good. So yellow is good, black is not supported. So you see, we basically support all of that, and I have no idea how fast we will be there with Zeebe. That depends on what the customers are requesting. So I envision a couple of the things being there very fast, and a couple of them, even some in yellow here, will probably not be there within the next years, but let's see. Yes?
What advantage we get when we start comparing to Caf-Co? Or is it useful to compare it to Caf-Co?
So if I can compare it to Kafka, or what was that a question?
Proper to compare Zeebe with Caf-Co, or like if I want to replace Caf-Co existing implementation.
Yeah.
With
So,
Zeebe.
okay. So the question was around, okay, how does Kafka and Zeebe relate? I would rephrase it. And there are actually different modes how to do that, and we discussed different scenarios with customers. So one could be you have Kafka and you keep Kafka and you send all the messages over Kafka, and then you fire up Zeebe right next to Kafka, and then the first approach, let's say the easiest, lightweight approach to get started could be you just listen to all the Kafka events and correlate that to workflow instances. And then you have kind of a read-only model within Zeebe, but then you start seeing how your workflows run through and if they are stuck and where. And you could already start leveraging Optimize, for example, in order to analyze it. But the workflow engine doesn't control anything. It just reads all the events. And then the next step could be, or different scenario could be, you allow the workflow engine Zeebe to control stuff, but still having Kafka as a central event bus or message bus, however you use it. But Zeebe as a workflow engine is able to consume events and probably produce new ones. Because you say, okay, if this event happens and that event happens, within a certain time frame, I have to do this, and then I send a new event to Kafka. That's, I think, the most common scenario we'll see over the time. We also discussed like a third scenario with customers where they completely replace Kafka with Camunda, with the Zeebe, which normally makes sense if they don't yet have it. If they already have, that's more complex. But then you could use Zeebe as an event bus. Technically, it's possible. From the API as well, you can send in events and consume events. It doesn't have to be a workflow. That could also make sense. So you have these different variety of options. And given the maturity of Zeebe, we're just jumping into all the discussions. So we don't have yet like this is the best practice or that way to go. But if you have a use case for that, I'm pretty happy to discuss. We're interested in all feedback we get there. Okay. Yes. Say it again, sorry.
Decisions are not supported at this point?
In Zeebe? DMN, you mean? DMN decisions? So DMN decisions are kind of supported in Zeebe, but the way we do it is different. So in Camunda BPM, the engines are both Java and are integrated. So whenever you have a DMN decision task, it's directly, synchronously executed. In Zeebe, and we already have that, then you will fire up basically a certain worker, like it's an own Java process you fire up, which is just there to evaluate DMN. And then you run the broker, and if you run it to a DMN task, the client subscribes to it, says, oh, there's something to decide. I do that. And this is probably, let's say, good old Camunda BPM 7 with the DMN engine, like you already have it. Decide something, give back the result, and then it moves on. So you can already do that, but it's it is a bit different. The client is somehow responsible to do it, but what you could do in your architecture is you could have like a generic decision worker, which does that for all the workflows. So you don't have to have it in every client. But you could also do it in the client. That depends, like it's an architecture question, though. Depends on elect. Did you? Yes.
I was just wondering what the name, where's the name from?
The way Zeebe, it's always hard to find names. There's a, I forgot, it's a rugby player or a football player named Zeebe. I think that was the kickoff for the name. So, do you like it or do you like it not?
Yeah, I'm still figuring out whether I like it.
We're, okay, but that's the fun fact. I'm not sure if we should have that on the recording, but we started as a project, kickoff with TNGP for the next generation process engine. And like TNGP, 4 names, like all the boy groups, 4 letters are good. So TNGP, and we thought about going with TNGP, and we were in the process of registering or getting the domains, but I forgot it was TNGP.com or org or some of the domains. It's a porn site, so that put some pressure on us to get a new name. So that's why Zeebe. So, any more questions? Yes, over there. Yes. So the question was, why did I lose my signal? Let's see if it comes back. I have signal here. So let's see. So the question was, how do we auto-scale? How do we scale the broker, basically? And that, I mean, at the moment, you're basically starting the brokers yourself, so there's nothing really built in, but we already had prototypes where we did auto-scaling on Kubernetes. So yeah, so the idea is you can always start brokers. You tell the broker at least an address of a different broker, and then they gossip. So they basically recognize what's already in the network, and then they will join that peer-to-peer network, that brokers, and you can define partitions, replication factors, and these kind of things, and then you have master and slave, and they will basically figure it out. And so whenever you shut down a broker, that will be redistributed. If the broker joins, it will join. So that's very easy. You can always fire up new brokers. The next thing is like load defined auto-scaling on Kubernetes, and there we did a couple of experiments. So that's.
So is it possible that one CB client can execute on multiple brokers? And have one flow that is defined? It localized to a specific broker, once it targets to a broker, it's going to.
So the question was around on which broker I basically execute which thing, right?
Is it only on one broker once it starts and ends in that broker, or it can
So let's see if I have.
balance itself?
Yeah, it load balances. It does. I don't have the slide here. I probably, if you have a second, we can do that here. Medium. Sorry, medium. Basically use my blog posts as slides. So either in this one or in that one, I have a picture for that. So the idea is like we're working with partitions and topics. So I had one picture. I always like making picture explaining everything. So there is also one picture explaining everything. And that's somewhere here. I think that one explains everything. And it's too small to be seen, right? How can I make that bigger? So what do you have? You have topics. So you can define topics, which is kind of a logical construct. It could be like, in this case, it could be like business lines or verticals. It could be clients or tenants or whatever it is. So you have these topics, and with these topics, you can define partitions. One workflow definition is always nailed to one topic. So that's why I use that default topic. That's the default. And then I can define partitions. And for the partitions, we distribute, like if I start a workflow instance, I distribute that to a certain partition. So if I have, like in this case, 4 partitions, we will, I think in the moment it's round robin, just distribute it between the partitions. And then we start one workflow instance here, one here, one here, one here, and then again. This is how it really scales. And then for every partition, you have this single writer principle. So one thread is taking care of basically everything. And this is how we remove locks and contention and a couple of other things. And so the partitions are really the scaling factor. And then you have additionally the replications for every partition. And with that replication factor of 2, for example, we're replicating two other brokers, so one can crash. And this adds obviously a bit of latency, but so. And this is more or less the picture how it works. It's not very different to what Zookeeper and Kafka is doing or what Cassandra is doing. Make sense? Awesome. Yes?
The event-only log event source, read-only events are...
Yeah. Events are read-only in event source system.
And that's written to the file system?
Yes.
Files written to the file system?
It's written to the file system.
Will that be like kind of a pluggable data provider model?
Okay.
Put a database in there?
So the question is, it's interesting only getting Zeebe questions, that's all. But so will the storage will be pluggable? Eventually, I think yes. At the moment, not. It's kind of an interface internally, so technically it's pluggable, but at the moment we're only working on file system, and it's, I think, sufficient for most of the use cases. We're getting asked for Cassandra from time to time, especially in geographical distributed scenarios. Cassandra could be beneficial, and then I could envision that as well, but currently we're not doing that. The good news is that if you have these append-only logs, you need a pretty dumb store. You just write. It's easy. It could be Cassandra. File system, the big advantage of file system, it's so fast. So if you have, not on Windows, unfortunately, but if you have Linux, Unix, Mac, it's really good. It's really good writing these batches of stuff. And then you get to these like high numbers of throughput. Any other questions? Yes. This one, nope, but I'm pretty happy to send you a draft if you send me an email, then you can review it.
Oh, I was just curious about the Kafka Zookeeper, but if you could answer the questions in the next paragraph. Why not leveraging Kafka?
Awesome. You already read in advance. So why did we not leverage Caf-Co or Zookeeper? It's manifold, the answer, but one of the main reasons is actually simplicity. So we don't want to have like a huge requirements list in order to run Zeebe, so it should be easy to run. And especially Zookeeper is not easy to operate. Probably if you already have Zookeeper in production, it could be probably good, but anyhow. So we wanted to have a small footprint. We wanted to have it under control. So we are doing open source for quite a while now. So we learned the importance of kind of control. So if we would use Zookeeper, it means that we would need a couple of Zookeeper core developers on the payroll. Otherwise, it's not possible to do that. And even then, you still have to discuss with a lot of other people for how to move on. So that's harder to do. And third reason is also for efficiency. We're not leveraging Kafka because we are doing in the core broker, we're doing stuff for the workflow engine. We couldn't do that in the same performance and the same efficiency if we're just external to Kafka or something like that. And for example, message correlation is kind of a hard problem in that scenario. So there are a couple of things which are not solved by these kind of tools. And that's what motivated us to do it ourselves. Okay. Other questions? Also happy to answer anything about Camunda, the company, the product, anything. Could be also Zeebe. I love Zeebe. It's no problem. How much time do we have? Okay, awesome. Yes, first.
You are not using Zookeeper for Zeebe, right?
You're right, we are not using Zookeeper.
Where do you store those partition information for topic and non-information?
It's in Zeebe itself. It's in the broker. Yeah. And they're gossiping underneath. So they're basically doing similar stuff than Zookeeper would do. But it's in the core broker. As soon as you start it, it's there. Yes?
And that information is maintained in memory, or it maintains its own commit log?
But now it's getting a bit fuzzy where I'm not sure if I'm telling the truth, but I think we're keeping it in memory. We're doing a couple of snapshots things, but I don't think for the cluster sheet. But I'm not completely sure, to be honest. Yes, question?
So I'm just curious, like, what use cases kind of drove you guys to develop Zeebe? Like what was
Okay. So what use cases drove us to develop Zeebe? And that's, yeah, I mean, high throughput, low latency use cases. So we had the discussion in different industries, actually. In financial things, if you calculate trades, you have like a lot of things per second. In telecommunication, we had that, not only doing like the new applications, like maybe a couple of thousands per day, but for example, every phone call or doing some checks there, like going from that, you have a couple of thousand per day to going to having like millions per second. And there, or logistics, there we are starting to having use cases where we see that. It basically has to do with what we saw throughout the day, that the use case, the technical use case, how you use workflow technology can be used really in a lot of scenarios, very, very simple integration scenarios. As soon as you have your first REST call, you probably have to do retrying all this and that. And so we start to see that adopted more and more, but then you get these requirements. Or we have startups which don't even have a relational database anymore. That's also sometimes true. Yeah, that's, so yeah, these are the basically high throughput and low latency, that's one thing, or no relational database. That's the two key drivers. Yes, correct.
Neural network thing going and to get everything fast.
There was a question there, right?
You switching the topic.
Yeah, that's okay. 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 Okay, so content-wise for CMMN, I probably also repeat what I discussed a couple of times over the day. That fits in 3 minutes, that's okay. And first of all, so what's CMMN? Let's check if that's still working. Yeah, awesome. But it takes longer than 3 minutes, whatever. So CMMN is also a standard from the OMG. It's about case management. Where do I find a better picture than that? Do bigger. Yeah, whatever, you get the idea. So cases are not like processes. In processes, you have like a sequence of steps. If that happens, I do this next, the sequence. In cases, it's different. You're relating because of conditions. You say, okay, something is true, might be data, might be some checkbox, something new, you know, some other activity that happened. Then you enable things, or you always have that idea of the knowledge worker who still can decide if I want to do something. So some use cases are also about communication with the customer, going back and forth, asking for new stuff, or deciding things on the go, so that you have much more flexibility than within Bpmn. That's case management, and that's what CMMN is for. We have CMMN in the product, so in Camunda Bpmn, you can execute CMMN models. What you probably recognize if you look at the brochures, there's not CMMN on it. There's Bpmn and DMN. So what we currently do is we focus very much on Bpmn and DMN. So we, over the last 2 or 3 years, when we introduced CMMN in the product, we watched the adoption out there. And the adoption of CMMN over our customer base is really, really small compared to Bpmn. And even in these projects, people were not completely happy with CMMN, or could replace their CMMN models with Bpmn models, because you can do some kind of flexibility also in Bpmn. And that means, like bottom line is that we're currently focusing on Bpmn and DMN, and CMMN is kind of an on-hold state. It's in the product, we support it, we fix all the bugs, that's granted, but we're not investing much in it, unless we see a change in adoption, but I'm currently not expecting that. So I wouldn't, if it's avoidable, I wouldn't go too much into CMMN. That's the bottom line. Okay, we're having probably one last question. Somebody else? I mean, we don't run out of here, so you can.
Isn't it a bit of a catch-22? Because one of the reasons that there is no CMMN adoption is that there are no tools.
Okay, so the question is, isn't it that CMMN is not adopted because there are no tools? And probably yes, but from what I saw over the customer projects, I think even if you have the tool, it's really hard to get a big value out of CMMN. And this is most of the time combined with that the projects with CMMN are more complex because it's very, very fuzzy, and the value is much smaller because, I mean, it's very often like manual stuff. And if you compare that to straight-through processing, the value of doing something is much higher, and that makes these projects much harder. So prove me wrong. I mean, if the market tells me and within the next 2 years, hey, there's CMMN everywhere, people really want that, that's no problem. I mean, we have it, and somehow we introduced it, so we have it in the book, so CMMN is cool, but that's basically just the observation so far we have. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for coming. I hope that was enjoyable. I hope that was interesting. You have something to say, I think?
Yes, I just wanted to, can you go back to the website?
Yes.
Please.
This website?
No, the Camunda website.
Ah, yes, of course. The
yes,
website.
Perfect. So as you can see, we have the yearly conference. I just wanted to put it out here. And this year it's going to happen on the 20th and the 21st of September.
And, beautiful Berlin.
The early bird tickets are available until the 30th of June, which is this Saturday. So if you want to join us there, please do so. and feel free to get one of the tickets, and then we'll see you there.
This is where we meet.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Yeah, so it's actually the same venue. It's a beautiful venue right at the river in Berlin. And if you've always wanted to come to Germany, that's...
From experience, it's only an 8 hours flight away, so it's kind of...
Yeah, exactly.
kind of
So
cool.
yeah, that's
Awesome.
the opportunity. Go for it.
Cool.
And one last thing, so we are having a little happy hour, a few drinks, some snacks, actually quite a lot of snacks. And so just stick around, have conversations, and that's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Thank you. See you next time.